So Russia made the bold decision this week to help the Ukrainian military in more ways than one, which is pretty wild. I mean, we've got Russian soldiers voluntarily giving away their position and donating their money to the Ukrainian war effort, while the Kremlin shuts off one of the only ways they have to communicate. All right, let's get into it. So Ukraine is in the middle of a counterattack in the south right now, and it appears they timed this perfectly to align with Russia losing access to Starlink, making it that much harder for Russian forces to effectively communicate. Now, Thorkill, an analyst talking about this, said, quote, "The main attack started on February 6th, a day after SpaceX disabled unauthorized Starlinks. The loss by the Russians of the ability to transmit live video from Mavic, or reconnaissance drones, has a significant impact on the course of the fighting in the Berezov and Ternivate areas. Russian units were forced into communications using walkie-talkies. Within one day, the Russian communication system thus has reverted to the state from 2022. Currently, Russian communication units are hastily installing Wi-Fi bridges everywhere, but this will only partially compensate for the loss of Starlinks." And this is something we've talked about in recent videos, and this gets us into the first assist from the Russian military. And I don't want to take away from the incredible actions being carried out by the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground there, taking back territory and in the fight, in a serious fight, day in and day out. But Russia took a couple of actions here that, I mean, by all accounts, are helping the Ukrainian forces move forward. The first one here was a Starlink scam, is the best way to put it. We've talked in recent days about how important Starlink has been to really both sides in this fight. And there's been a real argument inside of Russia and inside of Ukraine that they are too reliant on this system. And what happens if all of a sudden it becomes unavailable? Well, Russia just found out within the last couple of days. And the answer is they had not built up adequate redundancies. So when Starlink went down, a lot of units went into the dark. Now, there's other ways for them to communicate. One of those was Telegram. And spoiler alert for the second way that Russia helped out this week, they're shutting that down too. So what happened when Starlink went down is understandably Russian soldiers across the front panicked. I mean, there was no public announcement that this was about to happen and, at some point in the next day or two. So guys were trying to figure out, how can we make this work? And Ukraine saw an advantage. Their 256th Cyber Assault Division set up some fake profiles and fake bot accounts and said, "We got you." They reached out, they had Russian soldiers reaching out to them. They went into public Telegram channels and VK pages over in Russia's Facebook and said, "Here's your solution. We got you. We just need a little bit of information." And these Russian soldiers, so panicked to try to get Starlink back up and operational, voluntarily sent over to this group $6,000 in donations to get their equipment back up and running, which it couldn't. That all went directly into the Ukrainian armed forces. Then they also provided 2,420 submissions with Starlink details and precise geolocations. They just gave up every location for a Starlink terminal. Not every one, but every one of those is a location for a Starlink terminal. And those aren't just anywhere. I mean, you have to assume that every one of those is at a relatively sensitive location. So great job handing that information over, but also the details for each one of those Starlink terminals was immediately added to a blacklist. So what prompted all of this is Ukraine set up through SpaceX a whitelist program, and they said any terminal that we give you, that we tell you about, is set to be operational. We can keep that one running. Russian troops just sent over all of the information and unknowingly added their terminals to a blacklist, which Ukraine says has now made them, quote, permanently inoperable. So I guess they'll continue to be used as cutting boards and rain protection or whatever Russia's using them for right now. On top of that, during the course of this operation, the Ukrainian government did have a number, they said dozens of Ukrainian citizens that reached out offering, thinking that this was a legitimate service, offering to register Russian Starlinks in their name. So they would appear to be Ukrainian. As of now, they say investigations are ongoing into all of those people that raised their hand saying that they would, for money, kind of act against Ukraine and in Russia's best interest. But either way, that's a lot of Starlink terminals down and a lot of money given by the Russian military directly to Ukraine. Now, turning to what is actually happening with this offensive right now to kind of paint the backdrop here, I'm going to pull up a map to give you an idea of where this is taking place. We're going to be looking down here in the south, in the Zaporizhia direction. A lot of the fighting recently has been happening up near Kupiansk, in the east near Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and then Pokrovsk, this little pocket here. Right now, we're looking in the south. Turning to Russian mill blogger Military Informant, he says there is extremely little information on the ground about what is happening. First, the recent disconnection of the Starlink systems of the Russian armed forces has played a role, which not only significantly complicated the communication and management of the forward units, but also seriously limited the flow of information from there. He added that secondly, as has become a tradition, the Ukrainians are diligently maintaining OPSEC, or operational security, providing very few details about his actions. Now, this is the area we're looking at here specifically. It's at a bit of a corner, a bit of a break here between Zaporizhia and Dnipro, and we have seen in recent days videos of Ukrainian forces operating in this area. So no doubt they're there, but looking at Ukrainian pages and official government announcements, very quiet. Like not at all what we're seeing in other sectors. In fact, it reminds me a lot of what we saw up in Kupiansk. And it does kind of look like, in that sense, military informant and I are on the same page with what might actually be playing out here. But before we get to that, a quick thank you to the sponsor of today's video, CyberGhost VPN. So as you can imagine, in this line of work, I spend a lot of time online on a bunch of different websites around the world, which means every single time I log on, my internet footprint is pretty exposed. And that's why I partnered with today's sponsor, CyberGhost VPN, to keep my online activity private. A lot of people don't realize just how much information gets collected during regular, everyday browsing. I mean, incognito mode does not actually protect you, and public Wi-Fi can make things even sketchier. Your internet provider, work networks, and third parties can still track what you're doing. Now, CyberGhost VPN secures your connection by encrypting and rerouting your internet traffic. That helps keep your real IP address hidden and your activities private. It's also great for accessing geo-restricted content on 40-plus platforms like Netflix and Disney+. And changing your virtual location can even help you find better deals when shopping or traveling. Now, CyberGhost works on Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, and other devices. And one subscription lets you protect up to 7 devices at one time with a setup that's quick and easy. With over 38 million users worldwide and over 20,000 excellent reviews on Trustpilot, it's one of the best products in the market. Now use the link in the description to get an 84% discount plus 4 months free. You'll also get a 45-day money-back guarantee and 24/7 customer support. So you can try CyberGhost completely risk-free and see how it works for you. Check out the link in the description or the pinned comment, and thank you so much to CyberGhost for sponsoring today's video. So now, a military informant said what he thinks is happening right here is actually very similar to what happened up in Kupiansk a couple months ago. As a bit of a refresher, Russia claimed that they had taken this entire city, this entire town. They had not. They still have not. It opened the doors for a lot of false reporting on the Russian side that Ukraine was able to take advantage of and pretty quickly mop up a lot of this area. And as we can see, there's, according to Deep State Map, a small contingent of Russian forces now surrounded in the city center itself. Now, moving back down south, military informant says the armed forces of Ukraine carried out a covert concentration with subsequent counteroffensive in the area of Kupiansk, which ultimately led to the unexpected loss of a large part of the settlement, which was already not controlled by Russian units. He says in this regard, the situation in the area of the current Ukrainian offensive has certain similarities. The strikes are being carried out on recently captured positions where it has not yet been possible to organize a stable defense and supply, which is why the armed forces of Ukraine are currently having some success. But the fog of war persists, so it is not clear whether the armed forces of Ukraine have managed to advance anywhere else and whether they will be able to advance in the future. The most likely goals of the enemy now are to disrupt the pace of the armed forces of Russia's offensive in this junction, where the greatest successes have been demonstrated in recent months, as well as to demonstrate the still existing ability of Ukraine to conduct offensives themselves. They say the scale of such offensives has significantly decreased, and their goals are much more localized than they were earlier. Therefore, it can be stated that such operations demonstrate only the gradual degradation of the capabilities of the armed forces of Ukraine, which inevitably decrease from year to year. I got a couple thoughts on that. First off, he kind of says why this area is being targeted, calling out that, hey, this is where Russia has seen the most success in recent months, and I would argue that that success may have been fabricated. If this is looking like what we saw up in Kupiansk, it means that there were a lot of flag planting operations and individual soldiers moving forward, and then Russian mappers saying that is now our territory, and Russian commanders from the lowest level on up saying we control all of that, even if it's one Russian soldier 8 kilometers through the gray zone that gets killed the next day in a basement. That is, according to Russian sources, still under Russian control. If that is why they have seen the most progress in this area, then naturally it makes sense that Ukraine would carry out a similar type of counterattack that we saw up in Kupiansk. The other part here saying that the size of these operations is indicative that Ukraine doesn't have the ability to carry out large-scale offensive operations. That's just what this war is at this point. So we've talked about this recently where some started to refer to what you're seeing on the screen here as a counteroffensive, like Russian sources as well, saying this is a major counteroffensive. It's not. This is a counterattack. It's a relatively small scale in the grand scheme of things, but that's how Russia has been fighting for a while now as well. This isn't unique. I mean, Russia is not carrying out large armored assaults across multiple areas of the front, and I don't think military informant would say that is due to a degradation of Russia's military capabilities. That is what you're seeing right now in the Zaporizhia direction is the nature of current warfare, or at least in this war. Now, while we're looking at this map, something I wanted to call out is this gray area here. Personally, this is one of the reasons I like Deep State Map, is I think they do a better job of showing contested areas, and that's the term I've regularly used. Deep State Map is changing that, saying now these gray areas indicates infiltration. And to give you a bit of a comparison here, shifting over here to Syriac Map, both of these will be in the description below if you want to use it. It looks like they might be starting to do a bit of this. It's kind of hard to see, I gotcha, but right in the middle of the screen here, we've got blue, which signifies Ukrainian control, no color, or just the natural map color. I guess that's the infiltration area or contested zone, and then red is Russian control. I don't think that's, look, Syriac Map is a good map if you want to get an idea of kind of tracking the Russian Ministry of Defense's claims. Personally, again, I think this gray does a good job here. Deep State Map said, quote, the gray color on the map now indicates areas of infiltration. So individual soldiers moving through the lines, it's no longer like a set line of control. They said, in fact, this decision has been brewing for a long time. The war over the past year has seriously changed, and the classic understanding of the line of combat has disappeared. There are no two lines of trenches in which the front line sits and fights. The war has taken on strange forms, quasi-front lines, infiltration, secrets, etc. In some villages, you can't even draw a line because in one basement there are ours, Ukrainian soldiers, in others, Russians, and then again, Ukrainians, and then Russians. And these positions may never fight each other because positions often don't fight, drones do. And the task of such positions is to survive. And often the best way to do this is to not give yourself away. I want you to keep this in mind, and I'll link this assessment from Deep State Map in the description. I want you to keep this in mind when you see people really dig in on movement on these maps, all right? We've long said that this should just be viewed as a general view, long-term progress in either direction. And I think what we're probably going to see here in the coming weeks and months is just an expansion of this gray zone. That is just how this war is being fought right now. They say the enemy suffering heavy losses no longer conducts mop-ups of every corner, but simply moves on. Thus, it turns out that in his rear, 10 to 12 kilometers, there may be Ukrainian positions. But these positions are no longer gray because the Russians have marked them as under their control. At the same time, the enemy often passes through the positions of the Ukrainian Defense Forces, lives there for months, and it's not always possible to kill him. We saw some of that in the Dobropilia direction, a bit northeast of here. What do you do then? That's certainly not objective control, living in a basement by yourself for 3 months. But in some maps, that's marked as control, and it gets messy, to say the least. They say, thus, the classic gray zone simply died, and the infiltration zone is the presence, temporary, permanent, or periodic, of both sides of the war. At the same time, if there are takeoff points of enemy pilots in populated areas, 2 companies in the basements, then 2 of our fighters hidden from everywhere, that is not objective control. Again, I think some important insight there into how we should be looking at these maps, especially times like this, as we are seeing both sides kind of contest where exactly did Ukraine move, what exactly does Russia have control over. In fact, the Ukrainian GUR put out what I think was a pretty interesting video kind of talking to this just a couple days ago, where they talked about defensive operations happening in the Zaporizhia direction. And this was actually a bit west of the current operations, kind of along the Dnipro in the Stepnohorsk area, where they say the enemy, the Russians, who previously managed to pass the advanced positions, was unable to gain a foothold on the new lines to complete the circlement of Stepnohorsk. The tactical group Revenge of the International Legion GUR receives an order to destroy the remnants of the enemy group in the activity of this settlement. Regular fire raids and sorties of our groups exhausted the Russians, who never waited for reinforcements. However, the enemy continues to actively use FPVs and artillery to cover his advance forces. So again, individual small groups of Russian soldiers being hunted down, in this case by elements of the GUR International Legion. In fact, we've got an interview that just published a couple hours ago with a couple guys from that unit. Not necessarily the unit that took part in that operation, but GUR Legion. Check that out a couple hours ago if interested. Now, quick fundraiser update. We're working with Car for Ukraine here to provide a number of vehicles, 8 vehicles in this one, for the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. We're at 66,000 raised of a 97,000 euro goal, so we're rocking this one, moving right along. Some good stuff on the page here if you want to check it out. Link in the description. We got a video from the 104th, the different patches you can receive for your different levels of donations. And then I mentioned this previously, but it's always worth checking this out. Get down there in the bottom and you can see some of the messages from our donors that are, reaching into their wallets and generously donating day in and day out to help these guys with the trucks that they so desperately need at the front. Again, for those interested and able, that link will be in the description below. Now, turning to the second item here that Russia seems to have made that benefited Ukraine, no doubt, was they decided a couple days ago to start throttling, maybe even completely shutting down Telegram. Now, Telegram is not the only messaging service out there. There's a number available. It is the one that Russian forces have been overly reliant on for quite a while now. They have viewed WhatsApp as being infiltrated by the West. It's not worth it. It's not secure. Telegram has been the one they've looked to, and there are Russian products as well, but the Russian military and the Russian bloggers and everyone knows that the Russian government is just watching everything they say, so they don't want to use that. Either way, Telegram's starting to experience some slowing down across the front and across Russia. And what really triggered a lot of outrage here was the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, who said, quote, "I don't think it's possible to imagine that frontline communication is provided via Telegram or some other messenger. Talk about disconnected." Whoa. So yes, Telegram is being used at frontline units day in and day out. And we had Russian mill bloggers just pile on this start to finish. Two Majors says, quote, "Anyone who says now that Telegram doesn't play any role on the front line is either completely unaware of frontline processes or is deliberately lying." He added, "We have fewer and fewer questions as to why the 4th anniversary of the start of the special military operation is coming soon." Telegram is not a one-to-one replacement of Starlink. They've been used in conjunction. I mean, one is an app that you have on your phone. It's a messenger. The other is a Wi-Fi network. All right, so these are not the same thing. But when Wi-Fi went down in so many areas, one of the backups that guys were using when they could was Telegram over cell networks when possible. So the Kremlin the timing here could not have been worse. It's kind of shocking that they decided to make this move while the Russian military is scrambling at the front in the middle of a war to come up with alternatives to their main line of communication going down. Archangel of the Special Forces said, "This will set us back a couple of years." Quote, "The primary problem is the loss of interaction between units. Established communication channels will collapse. Against the backdrop of the lack of internet at the positions, the transfer of intelligence information will now slow down, and the absence of Telegram will exacerbate the situation, as there will be additional delay in information at the management level. Basically, this will set us back a couple years, roughly to the very beginning of the war. However, alternative methods are already being devised, but the recovery will take a long time." Again, there are alternatives. Russia has alternatives, but very similar to Starlink being shut down, and Russia has alternatives to those. They're in the middle of an active fight, and there is not like a drawdown period or a set changeover. Hey, come February 10th, 11th, 12th, you can't use this anymore, so start getting ready. That didn't happen. It just stopped. So it caught the entire Russian military off guard. Another Russian mill blogger here, Filatov, again, fired up at Peskov, saying, "I don't think it's possible to imagine that anybody is using Telegram." He said, "What else is it impossible to imagine? It's impossible to imagine that just a week ago, our troops were still relying on the enemy's satellite network for communication. It's impossible to imagine that many essential items for war and military life are still being supplied to soldiers almost exclusively at their own expense or by volunteers. It's impossible to imagine that the entire country is supplying the army with civilian vehicles while the army is desperately trying to combat this practice. It's impossible to imagine that mobilized soldiers are not only being made to serve indefinitely without any term limit, but are also being forgotten about, and many are being forced to sign contracts under the threat of death. It's impossible to imagine that people on crutches are being sent to the combat zone just to comply with all of the formalities. It is impossible to imagine that in the 4th year of this war, the authorities still consider it treasonous to even mention the losses." The shutdown or the slowing down of Telegram is a really big deal. And you're going to see a lot of folks, especially those that are not in Russia, talk about how it's not and it doesn't matter, or it's not an authorized system, so it doesn't matter. The bottom line of this is Starlink and Telegram were serving a significant role in Russian communications networks. They could transfer away from those over a period of time, no doubt. I would argue that nothing right now is going to be as effective as Starlink, but to completely go cold turkey off of both of those in the span of just a couple days is having a real impact at the front and likely contributing to the Ukrainian success in the Zaporizhia direction. Now, overnight, we got some news of some deep strikes that are being carried out by Ukraine into Russia, but it's been, to be fair, both sides. The deep strikes have been rather continuous on the Russian side, a little more sporadic from Ukraine. But the last couple days saw a number of oil refineries hit here. We've got footage of each of these. United 24 said on February 12th, the Lukoil, and I'm going to put this word on the screen, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I don't know where to begin. They say the Lukoil oil refinery in the city of Ukhta, more than 2,000 kilometers from Ukraine's border, was struck by drones. 2,000 kilometers. According to local reports, at least 3 strike UAVs reached their target. The refinery plays a crucial role in supplying fuel to the country's northern regions and provides lubricant to industrial facilities. As one of Lukoil's 4 major refineries in Russia, it provides heavy crude oil and produces gasoline, diesel fuel, and aviation kerosene. That is a long-range strike. And for multiple drones to get through and actually carry out and have good effects on target is pretty significant. But it wasn't, and for what it's worth, this has been confirmed by Russian channels as well, with military informant stating that these drones did attack the Lukoil refinery, saying the work of mobile fire groups can be heard, but some of the drones reached their targets and a large fire was recorded at the facility. Then just a couple days ago, on the night of February 11th, Ukraine put out a note saying that the first separate center of unmanned systems carried out a strike on the Volgograd oil refinery. They say this is one of the key oil refinery assets of Russia, also owned by Lukoil, with a capacity of up to 14 to 15 million tons of oil per year. They say the refinery is an element of fuel security, logistics, foreign exchange earnings for the enemy. When such facilities are shut down, supply chains are disrupted, budgets lose revenue, and the system begins to malfunction. Now, we have not seen a lot of successful deep strikes carried out by Ukraine in a while. We know that almost every night there are a number of Ukrainian drones launched into Russian territory. If one of those is shot down just as it crosses the border, maybe that was destined for one of these refineries and didn't make it there because it got shot down. So we don't know if these haven't been targeted in a while or if they just have not been effectively struck in a while. But it does look like, just over the past couple of days, given the volume and the effectiveness of these strikes, that Ukraine may have been stockpiling some of these longer range munitions, and we might see a continuation or an uptick in their strikes against the Russian oil refineries. The other side of this is that Russia hasn't really slowed down at all. So over the course of the past 3 days, there have been 498 total munitions fired by Russia into Ukraine. Earlier today, Ukrainian President Zelensky said, quote, "The main target of the attack was the energy infrastructure in Kyiv, Odessa, and Dnipro, including power generation and substations. There are also damages in Kharkiv, Donetsk, Kyiv, and Kherson regions. In Kramatorsk, a drone hit a state emergency service building. The situation in the capital is complex. Many buildings remain without heat." And I should note that also in the last couple days, we have seen a relatively sustained Russian campaign going against the rail lines in Ukraine. So we've seen a number of rail cars hit and burning and destroyed or significantly damaged here just in the last week. So there's a lot happening here. We've got the long-range strikes continuing and certainly offensive operations happening on the ground. And, of course, in the backdrop of all of this is the possible continuation of negotiations to try to find some sort of peaceful settlement to the end of the war. Of course, don't forget to check the link in the description to grab the special CyberGhost VPN discount available now. It keeps your data safe while you browse and unlocks all blocked content online for just $2.03 a month. And, of course, it's completely risk-free, so check it out today. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.